world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Wednesday, December 3rd, and of course, we got a lot to talk about. We always have a lot to talk about because there's always stuff going on with this administration. Now, we had this election going on last night in Tennessee. It was a special election for a vacant House seat. This was a district that Donald Trump had won by 22 percentage points. And we had been talking about the idea of Afton Bain, the Democrat, potentially winning the seat. And I said it was going to be a long shot. Like I said, it was a deep red district that it potentially wouldn't flip, but it could. And one of the reasons we were thinking it could have flipped was because the polling showed Afton Bain having closed within 2 percentage points. Now, I don't like polls. Polls have been notoriously wrong. Based on the polling, Afton Bain could have won by 1% within the margin of error or lost by 5 if the polling was accurate. And that's not what happened. Now, if you can't tell by the way I'm talking, Afton Bain did not win. She did lose, and this Matt Van Epps, who is a Trump humper, who's MAGA as MAGA can be, did win with 51% of the vote. Now, that in itself is kind of troubling because he's a MAGA and he's a Trump humper. But there is some good news in all of this. She did get like 40-some percent of the vote. She only lost by slightly under 9%. Okay. That means she outperformed Kamala Harris by 13 percentage points in a deep red district. That's pretty good. Now, I know some people out there are saying, well, it's a big loss and they're getting upset. And I get that. Okay. Democrats had a chance for a rare pickup and it was going to put pressure on Republicans. But this is still putting pressure on the Republican Party because they didn't do nearly as well as they thought they could have or as they probably should have. Van Epps should have at least won by, you would think, 15 percentage points, but he didn't. He won by less than 9. And now this is going to be a response to somebody that was in my comments who was ultimately a Trump humper that I blocked, came in and said, well, I'm not sick of Donald Trump yet, and his endorsement's worth at least 10 percentage points. Well, if that's true, if that is true, and Donald Trump's endorsement is worth 10 percentage points, that means without Donald Trump's endorsement, a Democrat would have won that district. That's simple math. If he won by less than 10, and according to this MAGA Trump humper, said that Donald Trump's endorsement's worth a good 10 percentage points, well, that would mean Afton Bain could have won if Donald Trump hadn't endorsed this guy. Now, I don't know if that's true, and I don't know if all MAGA think that way. Because we're seeing people coming around, starting to walk away from Donald Trump, and it's going to get worse as things continue. Okay, things aren't going to get better for Donald Trump. He is going to be facing a lot of difficulties with not having support when the Epstein files come out. The more they talk about this issue with Pete Hegseth and the boats, the more his health gets scrutinized, all of it. Every day, things are going to get worse for Donald Trump. So I don't know how much more his endorsement's going to be worth and if MAGA is going to be willing to support him much longer. But we'll see. But according to this MAGA, that Donald Trump's endorsement is worth 10 percentage points. That just tells me there's at least a section of this country, despite everything that Donald Trump has done to this country so far, they will not walk away from it. And what we need to do is once Donald Trump is gone, once he is out of power and once everything comes out, even if they won't walk away from Donald Trump, we need to make it so that being a Trump supporter in public, talking the things Donald Trump is talking about, is not considered socially acceptable, and that it would be similar to how a lot of members of the Klan actually operate, where the stuff goes in the closet. They're not open and talking about it. Now, this is from my experiences, at least from what I know. I have uh, people that I have talked to, in fact, who have had family members that were in the Klan that they never knew. That it has become such a thing where it's it's not talked about in public. It is done in secret. Now, I don't know if that is the same everywhere, but that's the kind of idea what we need to do is where, you know, when your MAGA supporter passes on, somebody's cleaning out their closet, they find all the Trump gear and the MAGA merch and everything, and they go, "Oh my God, this they were a Trump supporter." It needs to have a negative connotation, and I think we can do that. But going back to the election for a little bit, with Afton Bain coming within 9 percentage points of winning, that is just a sign of more momentum. Democrats need to keep their foot on the gas here. They are having a chance to actually make a difference. Now we've got two more special elections coming up, one in Texas, one in New Jersey. Both should be Democratic pickups. Either way, if they pick up those two seats, that would bring the total in the House to 215 Democrats to 220 Republicans. Okay, that means Republicans can lose about 2 votes before they end up before something fails. 3, and the majority goes against whatever they are trying to pass. And then when you have Marjorie Taylor Greene leaving here as of January 5th, and she hasn't changed her mind despite people trying to pressure her to stay to the end of her term. That is going to be another district to watch. Now, I'm not going to say that we can actually pick up that district, but it's a special election. Now, I thought we'd have a lot more momentum if Afton Bain had won that election, um, but she didn't. So now we got to deal with what's going on, and we have to actually put the gas on and keep pushing forward. But the Republican Party's imploding on itself anyway. Um, Democrats need to keep focusing and they need to get their message straight. They need to be honing a message for 2028. And I know the midterms are around the corner, but they need to get their message together for 28 and start using that in 2026. And I'm talking about a New Deal style message. That's what I think they need to actually be successful and not just successful in the short term. I'm talking long term where we deal with affordability and accountability and we hold people accountable for the decisions and the choices they've made and for going along with things from this administration. So it was a disappointing day that Afton Bain didn't win that seat, but the fight's not over. Okay. We still have the midterms coming up. We have other special elections. And as things continue to mount and the pressure continues to grow, we are still going to see what happens to the Republicans. We don't know if there will be other defections. Are some members going to flip party? Are they going to resign? Are they going to just pass on? Because both parties have a problem with age when it comes to um, having older people in Congress. And we need to work on getting younger people in. And I think 26 and 28 by extension are going to be where that happens. We're hearing some of the older members of Congress are not going to be running. People like Nancy Pelosi, that she is decided not to seek reelection, going out on her terms, which is fine. And she has a great career, and this is not holding anything against her. But she's in her late 80s. She has fewer years ahead of her than she has behind her at this point by a considerable amount. We need to get somebody with a younger perspective in there, somebody who is dealing with the things that are affecting everyday people. not being able to afford rent or a mortgage, um, your the problems with affordability and not being able to afford groceries and deciding whether or not they, how do they stretch their budget to cover the ACA payment when their medical comes up. All of those things. We need to get younger people in, and that is a good stepping point with some of these older people getting out of the way. But it's a two party problem. And I'm going to throw him under the bus again because I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't talking about old people in Congress and complaining about Chuck Grassley. You have Chuck Grassley here in Iowa, who has been a senator longer than I have been alive. He is 92 currently. He is up for reelection in 2028. He would be 96 years old, and as of right now, has every intention of running again. That would put him at 102 when that term is up, if he lives to the end of that term. Now, he seems to be in better health than some politicians, don't get me wrong, but he is still 92. And Chuck Grassley is so well known and so well liked for some damn reason in this state, mostly because of just name recognition and people not paying attention to politics, not nearly close enough, that they recognize the name Chuck Grassley, that they recognize that when they go to vote, they see Grassley and they just go, oh, yeah, he's been there for a while. He knows what he's doing. Check and done. Right? Chuck Grassley is a problem for this state, but because he is a staple, a lot of people vote for him because they just know the name. And we got to change that. Now, I've been hearing that one of the plans, and if they're going to do it, they better do it quick because Kim Reynolds' time as governor is running out. And I still believe that Rob Sand is going to be the next governor of Iowa. He's a Democrat. He is currently the only statewide elected Democrat. But that being said, I think Rob Sand will be the governor. But anyway, with Kim Reynolds having just a year left, I had heard the plan had always been that for Chuck Grassley to resign or retire, and for Kim Reynolds to appoint his grandson, Pat Grassley, who is currently the Speaker of the Iowa House of Representatives, who is about my age. He's in his 40s, to replace him. That way, when people go to the voting booth, again, they'll just see the name Grassley and they will think of his grandpa and go, oh, yeah, Grassley, he's been there forever. I know him. Check and done. And that shouldn't be allowed. But of course it is because the governor can appoint whoever they want when there's a vacancy. Now, if they do that, I will turn around and use my platform as best I can to draw attention to that fact that is exactly what they did. And I would hope other Iowa creators would do the same and try to push to make sure that he becomes a one-term senator. That way we end up with somebody else in office. And maybe he'll screw everything up that they'll realize it's not his grandpa. He doesn't have the same legacy, but who knows? All right. Now, yesterday, there was this cabinet meeting. But before the cabinet meeting, I think they did the cabinet meeting in part because of all the questions about Donald Trump's health. And whenever there starts to be questions about his health, they do a cabinet meeting. And they usually do a long cabinet meeting where they put him out in front of the press and they try to show how fit and healthy he is and how there's no problems with his health. Except here's the problem. He wasn't in good shape. And before the cabinet meeting, in the middle of the night, Donald Trump spent like 3 hours on Truth Social. He was sundowning. And if you know anything about people who are dealing with dementia, stroke complications, or anything like that, Alzheimer's, a lot of times they can do what is called sundowning, which it means like at night after the sun's down, when they get their nights and days backward, and they end up being awake in the middle of the night, can't sleep, and they're just doing things, right? So Donald Trump was up for like 3 hours in a stream of posting on Truth Social. He was at the pace of almost one a minute. And he was posting all kinds of things. Of course, some conspiracy theories, memes, uh, videos showing Melania in good light. I think he posted the same video 3 times, just constantly firing them off as he was thinking about stuff. Well, because he's Sundowns and he does this almost nightly, he was not very alert during this cabinet meeting. So they hold this cabinet meeting. And there were multiple issues with this cabinet meeting, of course, because it's Donald Trump. And there was a typo that was pointed out. And I don't know that this was intentional. I don't know that it wasn't intentional. It seems like it could have been intentional and that they were trying to see what they could get away with. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, in front of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, they had a name placard for him. And why do you have to have name placards in front of a room of people that you work with all the time? And I realize they televise the event, but these are cabinet level positions and they are out in front of the cameras enough that the press would know who they are. And when they're talking, a lot of times the media would put name banners and stuff on the screen anyway. So why did they need name placards? But anyway, maybe Donald Trump can't remember people's names and he has to have that he needs the name tag to remind him. But in front of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, there was this little name placard that said Secretary of War, except they spelled secretary wrong. It had 2 capital S's in the very front, reading SS. Now, if you are not familiar with history, the SS, or were basically the secret police of 1930s Germany. And the correlation here is that, well, some people are saying it was intentional because Donald Trump is playing straight from the 1930s Germany playbook. And they're doing a lot of things that 1930s Germany did. And I don't know that it was intentional. I don't know that it wasn't. I know that either way, it's a dumb look for this administration. It shows the ineptitude of this administration. I mean, if you are going to do this nationally televised press conference / cabinet meeting where you're making it look like, Donald Trump is fit and healthy and vital to do all of these things, don't you think you would want to make sure that something as simple as your position is spelled correctly? You're telling me with all of the secretaries in the room, all of the aides in the room, with everybody there, nobody caught that typo, if it was a typo. Now, I don't know which way it was meant, but it's a bad look for this administration. It makes people remember the fact that there are so many comparisons with them to 1930s Germany that we have to sit there and go, well, could it be or isn't it? The fact that we're even questioning it. If they hadn't but done so many things that looked like it came out of the 1930s Germany playbook, we would have just laughed it off and say, oh, it was a dumb typo and move on. But by them doing everything they're doing when it comes to rounding up immigrants and deporting them, no due process, the America First, the attack on the media, the attack on the courts, all of the things that if you watch what Germany did in the 1930s, right after a certain man came to power, and you know who I'm talking about. You would see a lot of similarities, and that is a problem. So you're telling me that nobody in this administration caught that typo? And if we didn't have the similarities, we wouldn't have even noticed, probably wouldn't even be talking about it. But anyway, that was problem one. And then Donald Trump comes out, of course. Well, first, before he says his dumb thing, the cabinet goes around the room. They spend like 45 minutes or so talking about all kinds of things that they are grateful for Donald Trump about and things like that. They're fluffing his ego. And they've done this in multiple cabinet meetings where they go around the room and they say something nice and positive about Donald Trump. And it reminds me of the South Park episode, one of the first ones of this administration when he got in office. You had everybody showing up to the Oval Office, giving Donald Trump a gift and saying something nice about him, and also saying at the end, "Oh, and you don't have a small penis." Yeah, I went there. And if you see that South Park clip, because I've seen it all over TikTok off and on since it aired, it shows this administration is that's how you get something out of Donald Trump. You give him a compliment, you pat him on the back, you tell him he's a genius. And now these cabinet meetings, apparently you say what you're thankful for or what you appreciate Donald Trump for or whatever. And was it Kristi Noem, I think, came out and said, well, she was thankful that we had Donald Trump as president because we had no hurricanes this year, like Donald Trump had something to do with it. Now, he didn't. We just got lucky. For the first time in several years, we had no major hurricanes hit the U.S. coast. And that is a good thing because, well, they've pretty much gutted FEMA. We look at what they've done with FEMA, they've done very little with response. You compare their reactions to how Joe Biden handled FEMA, and FEMA under Joe Biden, okay, they knew that the hurricane was going to hit. I can't remember what the name of the hurricane was, but the one that hit uh, parts of Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Florida, and then it was followed up right back to back with another hurricane hitting Florida. Um, but anyway, as we knew that was coming, Joe Biden had stuff staged, ready to go for FEMA. The resources were rolling. All they were waiting for was the disaster declarations from the areas that needed help. And within hours of the hurricane making landfall, FEMA was rolling in. Once it was safe to do so, they were rolling in offering aid. But it wasn't enough, according to Republicans. So they bitched and they bitched and they bitched. Remember, we kept hearing about how, oh, well, they're only getting $750. These people lost everything. But that $750 was the initial payment. And that's all the money that was authorized by Congress. That was an initial payment. We're going to get you stable for a few days while we process your claim. We see and while we work on the recovery effort, what can we salvage? What is your insurance going to cover? As you dig out, because there are so many factors in this that they only needed they wanted to give them time to figure out what the actual need was and how they could best help. But people were so pissed off that it wasn't enough aid, they thought that was all they were ever going to get. And they used that against both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the 2024 election. But fast forward to this year. Look at what this administration has done with FEMA. They wait months to send out aid, in some cases, sending no aid, especially to blue states. They don't do anything. And we question whether or not there's any money in the FEMA funds. They've done a lot of things where they're like, well, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, we're no longer sending this money or that money. And I think they even cut FEMA funding in the One Big Beautiful Bill. So by comparison, we got lucky that there was no hurricane. Now, are we going to dodge it next year during hurricane season? Probably not. I don't think we can go 4 straight years of dodging hurricanes. And if we do, this administration will have been one of the luckiest ever. But if we get hit with one, we're going to have to watch and see how this administration rolls out the FEMA funding. They probably will delay it. And what the response is going to be to the $750 initial payout. Is it going to be the same kind of outrage and backlash that we had heard when the Biden administration released it? I hope so. I hope people are that pissed, but I really doubt it. Okay, but they go around the room and they're fluffing up Donald Trump and his ego, making him seem like he's this big shot. And then Donald Trump comes out and he's talking about affordability being a Democratic scam. That affordability is just a Democratic scam. No, it's not. Okay. Donald Trump is so removed from the realities of what is going on, he doesn't even see it. And I don't think he cares. All he knows is if he says it long enough and loud enough that he thinks people are going to believe him. It doesn't take much for you to realize that things are not affordable anymore. When, I was just scrolling Facebook last night and I saw an ad for a duplex that I used to rent. Same management company and everything. Maybe not the exact same physical duplex, but same company and everything. Same number of bedrooms, exactly the same duplex. When I was renting there, it was $800 a month 4 years ago. They're now asking $1,250. Wages haven't gone up by half, but that's what they're asking now. $1,250 for the same duplex. Glad I got out. Glad I'm paying a mortgage at this point and not dealing with renting. But that's the problem. Not only is rent high, groceries are high, in part because of Donald Trump and his tariffs. But he doesn't want to admit that. Now he thinks that we've done so well with these tariffs and all the money's going to come rolling in. But it's not. And we're the ones paying it. Okay. Now these tariffs, you know, we pay the tariff ultimately. And was it Costco I heard? I think it was Costco has sued this administration over the tariffs and how it has affected their business. Now, we are waiting on a decision from the Supreme Court as to whether or not Donald Trump's tariffs are even legal. And I don't know when we can expect that decision. Um, we probably, it was done on an emergency basis, so you would think we would hear it soon. But they may drag this all the way out till May, June, or even July at the end of their term. Usually May and June, and sometimes the first week of July is when we get most of the Supreme Court decisions. And that's when they would decide whether or not Donald Trump and his tariffs are legal and whether or not to allow him to end up being able to continue to put these tariffs on. And then if they decide they're not legal, this administration would have to pay back all of those tariffs to the companies that paid them in. But again, my question becomes, what happens to those tariffs? So let's just use Walmart. I'm going to pick on Walmart. Sure, why not? I got lots of reasons to hate on Walmart, but we're going to pick on Walmart here. Let's say Walmart has paid, let's just say $10 billion in tariff money to the federal government. And they end up uh, getting reimbursed from the government this $10 billion. What happens? Do they kick it back to the customers and lower prices? Probably not. They're going to put it on the bottom line, call it a profit, and give their CEOs and their top people, and it may trickle down to some of their district managers and stuff if they spread it out far enough as far as percentages and stuff. All sorts of raises and bonuses. Oh, look, we made ourselves $10 billion last year. Hey, good job, us. But you only made that 10 billion, and I'm using that number as just a number I made up. But it still proves my point that we made that extra 10 billion in profit only because Donald Trump put illegal tariffs on. And because you raised prices because of those illegal tariffs. Everything is not affordable right now. Donald Trump and his tariffs have raised the cost of everything. You just go to the grocery store. Two of the things I complain the most about right now, pound of ground beef is anywhere from $8 to $10 here, and we're in Iowa. Beef used to be, I mean, not that long ago, you could get it on sale between $1.99 and $2.99 a pound, consistently. Now I'm lucky if I can see it on sale for $3.99, and that used to be the regular shelf price. The other one I talk about all the time is soda. And you notice I drink sodas on the podcast. I drink them quite a bit. But 12-pack of soda used to be at one point, and I remember this is going back several years, probably a couple of decades at this point, but you could get them 3 for 10, 4 for 10 every day. And they've slowly gone up and up in price. But even up to just the beginning of Biden's administration during the COVID pandemic, you could still get them on a good day, 5 for 10 on sale. Even 6 for 10, you could occasionally see them 6 for 10 on sale, something like that. Maybe 6 for 12, something like that. You could get them pretty cheap. They're now up to $10 a 12 pack around here. And they are like on sale. You're lucky if you get them 4 for 20, $5 a piece. Now, if I catch them at that price now, I'm buying some. Same with, and occasionally Walmart will have them even cheaper on a rollback or something. But if you're not watching your sales, you're paying $10 a piece. Things are not affordable. And that's just two examples. And there's way more examples than that you could get into. Everything is outrageous and more expensive, and this administration isn't doing anything to help with affordability. But Donald Trump wants you to believe that affordability is a Democratic scam. But he ran on affordability. That was one of his big campaign things. He talked about it all the time, about how he was going to lower grocery prices day one. He was going to have your energy bill within 6 months. He was going to lower gas prices. And yeah, gas prices here are a little bit lower. And when I say a little bit lower than what they were a year ago, I think they are within the realm. It's like 30 cents a gallon. That is not significant. Now, are they lower than what people remember Biden's gas prices being? Sure, because they remember where gas was when Biden took over. And I remember paying it. I was paying almost $5 a gallon. Going, why am I paying this much? And I had just switched vehicles from a small fuel efficient car to a bigger SUV. Uh, and I went from, you know, getting 30 miles to the gallon to getting 18 and having to fill up way more often, going, Jesus Christ, this is expensive. But I knew it wasn't Biden's fault. And of course, Trump pumpers aren't going to want to hear this, but it was Donald Trump's fault. He mishandled COVID. But one of the reasons why gas was so cheap during COVID when Donald Trump was president and started getting more expensive under Joe Biden, especially as people got back to work and we started getting people vaccinated and going through all of that, was because Donald Trump cut deals with OPEC to cut production. And they cut production during COVID when no one was driving, and they agreed to it, but it was like a 2-year deal. And then when people went back to work, we needed more supply, and they said, "Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. We're getting great price per barrel right now, so we're not going to do that." And that's exactly what happened. And Joe Biden tried to cut another deal. They wouldn't break that deal that Donald Trump had signed. He got them a great price. He screwed it up. But MAGA Republicans will not put the blame for any of it at Donald Trump's feet. They will still somehow find a way to blame Joe Biden. Continuing with this press conference, though, beyond talking about affordability and everything, the main reason of the press conference was talking about this issue with uh, the boats from Venezuela. Now, Pete Hegseth caught himself in a lie here, and he didn't know which way to spin it. They were talking about these boats from Venezuela, and they were talking about how this story has been leaked. Apparently, we've talked about it before, and now there is bipartisan investigations in the House and Senate looking into it about how Pete Hegseth apparently ordered the military to, quote, kill them all. And after one of the boats, it was one of the first ones, it had like 11 people on it. It was blown up. And after it was blown up, the there were some survivors hanging off, so reportedly hanging off the side of the boat. They were in no position to continue fighting. Okay. And they go ahead and they blow it up again. Now, That's one of the reasons for this press conference. But it took him a long time to get into that main reason for this press conference and this cabinet meeting. And Pete Hegseth comes out and says, "Well, yeah, I saw the first strike, but I didn't see the second one. I didn't know anything about the second one." He claims to not know about it. He says he never gave that order. Now, I think there's going to, when in this investigation, we are going to find out that yes, he did give that order, and that um, he is going to end up being known for this. Now, he says he didn't see it, and then he said, well, he wasn't watching it live, he was watching it on TV or something. The whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense. I think they're just trying to divert and distract away from it. I think he knows exactly what he did. And now that there is some scrutiny about what is going on, he's trying to get away from the scrutiny. Now, in theory, if we were in active war with Venezuela, this would probably be a war crime, but we're not at war. We have not declared war on Venezuela. In fact, um, I think the last time we declared war, I think, was December 8th, 1941, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Because I think I don't even know that we declared war necessarily on Iraq and Afghanistan. I think they just passed a resolution authorizing the use of force in those areas. I don't think it was actually a full on war declaration. We didn't declare war for Korea. If you know, I reference MASH a lot. And if you're of a certain generation, millennials and older, you're very familiar with MASH. Uh, and numerous times throughout the series of MASH, they talk about Korea and they refer to it as a police action, not a war. Um, and in all intents and purposes, it was a war, but because Congress never declared it as such, they kept referring to it as a police action. Same thing with Vietnam. It was never a fully declared war. So I don't think we've declared war on anybody since 1941. So it's not really a war crime. It would just be what it is, and that would be a straight up murder. And I've talked about it before, but I'm going to bring it up again. The proper way for them to handle these supposed drug running boats, if they knew right where they were, where they could go ahead and target them like they did, well, they should have let them hit U.S. Waters and had the Coast Guard intercept them. They could have turned around, had eyes on them the whole way, tracked them all the way to U.S. waters, have the Coast Guard intercept them, search the boat, seize the narcotics, arrest them, and charge them. That would have been the proper procedure. Something very similar, right? Maybe a joint thing with, you know, would it be the DEA, Drug Enforcement? Yeah, a joint thing with Coast Guard and DEA. So they should have turned around and used something like that. They could have gone through, used the DEA and the Coast Guard, searched the ships, and, seized everything, put them on trial. But they didn't do that. They decided to blow them up. And then we hear this story that there were survivors and they bombed them a second time. This cabinet meeting was an attempt to get a story and a message out to the American people and to get their cover story going about what was actually going on, who knew what. And Pete Hegseth just looked dumb doing all of it. He looked like he was inept, that he was trying to figure out the best way to spin his way out of this. And ultimately, I don't know if it's going to work. Now, there are bipartisan investigations in both chambers of Congress, like I mentioned. And that's significant because members of both parties are saying, hey, we need to look at this. And when they go to investigate and with what comes out, one of the things that could end up happening is articles of impeachment against Pete Hegseth. Because, yes, you can impeach members of the cabinet. You can impeach judges, you can impeach cabinet members, you can impeach the president. You cannot impeach members of Congress. But anyway, they could draw up articles of impeachment against Hegseth. And because it is a bipartisan investigation and because both chambers are doing their own, the Senate is going to have an idea of what is going to be brought forward if they do go the impeachment route. Now, I've got no guarantee that they are going to do that, but the simple fact that they are even looking at what this whole event was tells me they know it's going to be a bad story for them. And Donald Trump is trying to get away from it. Now, when Pete Hegseth is no longer Secretary of Defense, he could still face other punishments for these actions, including federal murder charges. It's entirely possible because that's effectively what it was. It was a military sanctioned murder. And he could face potentially, because of what they are looking at doing to Senator Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly turned around. He was one of the members of Congress that made that video that reminded members of the military to not follow illegal orders or unlawful orders. And this is probably one of the things they were talking about. And they didn't mention this by name, but clearly there are things where doing this would not fall under typical military procedure. This would be an unlawful order. You do not just blow up and use bombs on non-combatants at that point who cannot defend themselves, and especially when we're not in an active war with that country. And what the military could potentially do, I think, and I keep forgetting to look up to see if the National Guard works the same way as the regular standing army or any of the other branches, but I believe they can recall Pete Hegseth, reactivate him, just to court-martial him for this. And he could be staring potentially at a court-martial and time in Leavenworth. In fact, anybody all the way down the chain of command could potentially be facing things related to courts martial. And yes, that is the proper way to say that, not because, yeah, it is the plural of courts and martial describes the court. But anyway, all things courts martial. Now, they are trying to throw this admiral, I think it's Mitchell, under the bus. He would have been the admiral directly responsible for it and for sending in SEAL Team 6 and everything else to carry it out. And they're trying to make it seem like he is the one to blame. Now, they may try to make him the fall guy, and ultimately he may go down for it. And if they do end up holding a court martial or something for him, they could. But we're also hearing that Pete Hegseth, before he even started ordering the strikes and ordering the second strike, we heard that he had been talking to JAG lawyers, Judge Advocate General, the judicial branch of the military, and that he was asking them about it before he did it. And they said, no, that's probably not a lawful or legal order. And he didn't like that answer, so he went to Attorney General Pam Bondi. And she said, yeah, go ahead. No, there's no problem with it. That's legal. And he went, okay, I like that answer, and went with it. So there could be court martials for anybody involved, and they may try to set up some of these admirals to be their fall guys. But the minute I think one of these admirals, like I think it's Mitchell, becomes the fall guy, and let's say they do a court martial and he ends up facing time in Leavenworth, the rest of the military is going to take notice, and there's going to be less willingness to, um, you know, go forward and do some of these illegal orders. Now, there never should have been willingness in the first place, but when the thought of there being no punishment coming down from above, you know, that might have changed their perspective on whether or not they would have done something. But if they start feeling like they're thrown under the bus, they may ultimately end up backing away and not doing the things that they may have been willing to do before when they thought they had some level of immunity. Remember, the only one in that entire chain of command that has any level of immunity is Donald Trump, and that immunity only applies to official acts of the president. And effectively, you can't look at his motivations while doing official acts. However, what could happen, depending on how this all plays out, is there could be a court case that brings that immunity decision back before the Supreme Court, and they may redecide that and say, hey, you know what, we got it wrong. We're going to change that ruling. It could happen. I don't know when or if it will, but it might. So they're setting up fall guys for this. And ultimately, Donald Trump may set Pete Hegseth up to take the fall here. Whether he gives him an ultimatum saying, hey, you know what, you got to resign over this deal, whether he just straight fires him, that sounds more like Donald Trump's speed. Something like that. He could do either or. And then he could also turn around and do nothing and pardon Pete Hegseth. Now, I think that would hurt the Republicans in the long run. It would just be something else they have to answer for, and Donald Trump gains nothing from giving Pete Hegseth a pardon. Because then Pete Hegseth, when they go through these investigations, these joint investigations in Congress, then he wouldn't be able to plead the fifth on the stand. He would have no reason to not answer questions. So Pete Hegseth could be the fall guy here for this. And we'll have to see how far Donald Trump takes it, if he does let Pete Hegseth take the fall or whatever. Because Donald Trump won't take the fall for this. He never takes responsibility. He's always got somebody lined up who he can get to take the blame. So, also with this cabinet meeting, the other big story is Donald Trump appeared to fall asleep again in public on TV during a cabinet meeting. Now, of course, the Trump humpers are going to come out and say, well, he wasn't actually sleeping. He just had his eyes closed for a little bit and he popped back awake like he was perfectly fine. He just had his eyes closed while he was listening and he was thinking, or he was deep in thought, or they may try to say he was praying or some bullshit. No, Donald Trump was sleeping. It reminds, and this isn't the first time he's gotten caught sleeping in public. He falls asleep all the time during the day when he should be awake. This just exasperates the calls about his health, right? And that was the whole point of doing the cabinet meeting, I think, was A, to try to get ahead of the story with the drug boats and all of that, and also to show how fit Donald Trump was because we were scrutinizing his health again. And then he starts dozing during the cabinet meeting. He fell asleep in the Oval Office, just the other day for another event. There was one day he was doing a joint press conference, and when it wasn't his turn to speak, he kind of dozed and jolted himself awake. And I say it a lot, but it reminds me of my grandfather. In the later years of his life, we'd go to visit him, and we did quite frequently, but he was suffering from Alzheimer's, and he'd just start dozing off, wake up 20, 30 minutes later, like it was no big deal, and he'd have that same kind of confused look on his face that Donald Trump typically has. And I think Donald Trump is really suffering from a lot of problems. He doesn't sleep well at night, and this administration is just propping him up. They are trying to keep things going as long as they possibly can with Donald Trump. And they don't know what else to do. They can't break away from Donald Trump because of the MAGA base. And the MAGA base, if they do break from Donald Trump, will never vote for a Republican, or at least not those Republicans. Or they may never vote Republican again. They need a way to get rid of Donald Trump. And that may come with the Epstein files. But so far, they're just going to keep propping him up, let him doze in public. And like I said, there's been renewed scrutiny about his health. And it starts with this MRI. Back in October, he had his second yearly physical, which 2 physicals in a year was strange. Then Donald Trump lets it slip that he had an MRI. But then he's been asked several times, well, what'd they look at? If they did an MRI, what were they looking at with you? What was wrong with you? And he's like, well, I don't know. I don't know what was wrong. So you're telling me you had a major medical scan, you have no idea what was wrong with you, and you're just okay with it. Apparently, Donald Trump is perfectly fine with it. He has no idea what was going on, doesn't know whether they looked at it, although he did say to a reporter, well, I don't know what they looked at, but it wasn't my brain because I had a cognitive test. And I aced that. The cognitive test he is referring to, I talk about it a lot, is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. And I've seen this test administered myself. I've never taken one because I don't need one, but I have seen people have to take it. And usually it is correlate the numbers A1, B2, that kind of thing. They'll give you like 5 words and ask you to remember them and ask you again at the very end, hey, what were those 5 words I mentioned? And just see how many of them you remember. Now, I realize some people would not be able to, that part, some people even in their 20s may not be able to get because there's a lot going on and you may, forget 5 words later on. But then they show you 3 pictures of animals and they just want you to very generically name them. Lion, elephant, giraffe, or something like that, right? Or lion, elephant, camel, whatever the pictures are. They vary based on the version you're getting, but it doesn't matter, right? And then one of the other questions they have you do is they have you draw a clock, a typical analog clock. Now, the younger folks would probably struggle with this because analog clocks are becoming a thing of the past. But if they have you draw it and see how close to a clock you can get, now they don't care how artistic it is. It's just draw something that is as close to a circle as you can get and put the numbers in the right spots. And then they have you draw a time frame in there and see how close to the right time you can get. Do you make it look pretty close? And they use that just to see, where your abilities are and things like that, and your cognition. Do you know roughly, how close did you get it? And if you didn't, do you even recognize that it's not quite right, or does it look right to you? And they will tell you that you passed no matter how you did. But of course, with somebody with Donald Trump's ego, they're going to, of course, tell him he aced it, and he's going to believe that he aced it because he needs that. This cabinet meeting, in part, was trying to show that Donald Trump was still fit to be president. He's not. And the fact that he keeps dozing in public is going to eventually, I think, be one of the factors that leads them to ultimately move for the 25th Amendment and remove Donald Trump, if they don't move to impeach him first. And they may move to impeach him over the Epstein files. Why? Because him being in the files would be enough for at least a significant chunk of the MAGA base to walk away from Donald Trump, because they do genuinely care about children. They may be misguided about how they care about children, but they do, right? They may want to that because that's their big argument against transgenderism and LGBTQ and everything is think of the children. How can we explain this to the kids and everything? Because they can't think past the end of their nose and past what their own conditioning, and that, well, if you just teach them to accept everybody, that kids would accept it, right? They think their kids have the same built-in notions that they do, and they don't know how to teach their kids anything different. But they genuinely believe and they genuinely care about kids. And if Donald Trump ends up being in the files with anything that is severely damning, more so than what's already come out, like if these pictures that one reporter, I think it's Michael Wolff, has claimed to have seen that exist is of Donald Trump sitting there with 2 underage girls, both topless on his lap. If that image is real and it is in those files, that may be enough for the Republicans to walk away from Donald Trump. Why? Because they can walk away from him and hopefully keep like 20 to 25% of that MAGA base, or 20 to 25% of the voters that would walk away from it, whatever the number comes up to. I'm struggling with the math here for a minute, but that they keep the voters that would normally walk away, that would have sided with Donald Trump no matter what, that they turn around and they end up ultimately still voting Republican, still showing up because they're that pissed at Donald Trump. Because they know the writing's on the wall. When Donald Trump is out of power, they're done, right? When he's gone, the Republican Party is going to be in for a major overhaul. They're going to have to spend some time scrubbing the party, rebranding, getting rid of everything Trump related, because he's not going to be very well received. He's going to be a pariah. And they're going to have to rebrand if they want to have a serious chance at being relevant in national politics anytime soon. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. A little note, I think tonight I am recording with Mike, the Rational Boomer. Now, we are going to be doing the Boomer podcast. We might also be doing this as a joint Boomer and Analytical Iowan podcast, where the same episode would be up over on my page as well. I think we're doing that. And if not, either way, I'll still be a guest on the podcast. And if I don't end up posting that on my show, I will sit down and I will record another episode tomorrow for you guys. I'll be back tomorrow with even more. There's always stuff to talk about. And I miss the days when politics was boring and we didn't have major news events to cover every single day like this. But that's where we are right now. We've got a lot to cover. So I will be back tomorrow with even more. I encourage you to check out my appearance. I think it's going to be tomorrow's podcast with the Rational Boomer. If not, it may be Friday. So keep an eye out for that. And I will do TikToks and announce it here on the show when to expect to see me on the Rational Boomer podcast. All right. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope you have a great day, and I'll be back tomorrow because there's always stuff to talk about.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.